Hey folks, Fernando doing our video for the Modern Survivalist, and in this case showing you guys my knife. This is the knife I've been designing, and it's gonna be made by the Spanish knife manufacturer Aitor. Aitor has been making some of the more iconic survival knives for many years. You're probably seen the Jungle King 1 and 2, or maybe one of the Chinese knockoffs. Not the same thing. The quality of this is impressive. These are not exactly cheap knives, but they're very well made, despite of being the traditional hollow handle that you've seen so many times in some of those knockoffs. Here, something completely different. Anyway, Aitor is well known among knife enthusiasts, especially in terms of survival knives. So it's a real honor and a dream of mine to work with them in my project. And yeah, this is the blade I designed. Of course, it's not going to be having paracord. This is in fact a discarded blade because the bevels were not done, done right, and it's not, for production. But I'm getting this just to test the steel and the heat treatment, which for that purpose is perfectly fine. So I wrapped a little bit of paracord, of course full tang design, and using it. In fact, I spent yesterday several hours testing the edge retention and such, and cutting hemp rope, going back to paper, seeing how well it retained that edge. After that, batoning through wood, chopping with it, stabbing into a pallet and twisting and trying to break the tip, which of course didn't manage to do it, because check that out. So it's a nice thick edge. Remember, the bevels are not right. That's why this was discarded, but for the purpose of testing it, it's good enough. So several things to unload. This is going to be a little bit of a longer video, but if you're interested in the process, or at least my process of designing and ended up with a knife, this is what went down. So the first thing I noticed when testing the knife is how well it retains the edge. It's after a lot of research, I decided to go with N690. That's Bohler steel made in Austria. It's a very well regarded stainless steel high carbon knife with a few little ingredients extra added there, but you find it often in very expensive high-end knives. The Italian Extrema Ratio, those use N690, Fox I believe as well. Sometimes Spyderco made some blades, or they had those made in Italy. Anyway, you have even custom knife makers that make knives that cost over $1,000. N690. Now, why is it? Well, let me get this out of the way. You can make a fantastic knife with cheap, affordable steel. Cheap steel is underrated. It takes a beating, and it's perfectly fine for making a knife. It has this thing of, yes, there's marketing involved. Sometimes people obsess over steel that they'll never even see the difference, man. That's just the way it is. Now, when you actually do the testing and see the performance, you see a difference. That's also true. I cut several lengths of hemp rope, and the edge just kept on cutting and cutting and cutting. I know for a fact that with some of the other excellent steels out there that are a lot more affordable and easier to work with, I wouldn't have gone through even half of that, and still this was going and cutting. Not only that, because you can get a steel that's very strong, very tough, and very wear resistant, and it's going to be holding that edge. For example, S30V, that's going to be holding an edge a lot, but then when you have to sharpen it, that's a pain in the ass, because it's just harder to sharpen as well. In the case of N690, the claim to fame was that it's also easy to sharpen. Okay, so I knew about that. Now, man, was I surprised when after just 5 passes on each side, 5 on one side, 5 on the other, I ended up, after batoning through chunks of wood, chopping, I ended up with a knife that, check this out. This is the part, remember, this is the part that was more exposed to any potential chipping and damaging while chopping, and it cuts like a razor. I mean, I don't know if you get to see it. There's nothing here. There's no chipping, this exceeded my expectations. I'm just hoping I can get this light just like this into production and get this knife to you guys because it is beautiful. It bites. I mean, it's a bitey steel. You do this and you feel the thing biting into your skin after just a few passes. So just retain that edge very, very well throughout all, and then resharpening it's by far the easiest steel I've sharpened. I mean, within your good steel, it's just a little bit more, and usually it's this. They are softer steels as well. I mean, they're going to be losing the edge faster, and it's going to be easy enough to sharpen again. In this case, it's even easier to sharpen than those, and I'm talking about your 1095. At least in my experience with 1095, which is a great steel, it's not going to be holding the edge as much as this, of course. And besides that, it's not going to be as easy to sharpen as at least this particular knife. N690 with this heat treatment that I got here, this is easier to sharpen than any 1095 knife I've tested. Of course, it's supposed to be better. Supposedly that's what you're paying for. And I admit, a lot of people will barely notice a difference because maybe they don't have enough experience to do so. But if you do, it is there. And yeah, well, talking about that, these knives are not exactly cheap. It's going to be, regarding price, it's going to be about 200 bucks. I'll try to keep it just under 200 bucks if at all possible, not making any promises, but I'll try that. But keep in mind, for similar size knives in this same steel, you're usually paying quite a bit more. If not, check the prices of Extreme and Ratio. Those are like 400, 500 buck knives. Yeah, I guess you're paying a lot of marketing and such, and sure, and you know, they're fantastic knives and all, but I think that for what you're getting, it's actually a pretty good deal. Of course, if you just want a cheaper knife, just go and buy anything, you know, some Chinese-made knife, either stainless or carbon steel, which is also cheap enough, and it's very much serviceable. Sometimes we get lost in terms of the steel, when in fact the design of the blade geometry, the design of the knife, and the heat treatment, those are more important, because that's going to be giving you an excellent knife even though using a cheaper steel. But it's also the heart of the knife. I mean, the potential of what a knife can end up being or not, it's also limited to some extent by the steel. The steel is not going to be doing any magic, anything that's beyond its composition. We have to keep that real as well. So, you know, having the option of going, you know, with all bells and whistles, I just went with a nice high-end steel, and man, am I happy about that. It's just great. Now, in terms of blade design, I want to talk about that as well. Well, before moving on, if you're not familiar with N690, it's very similar to your VG10. Right? VG10 is the steel used by Falk-Niven. You know, talk about a knife, a survival knife. Falk-Niven knives, well, those were VG10. I mean, they used to be entirely made out of VG10. Then they moved to a laminated VG10. It just has, now it only has like a layer of VG10, and on either side it has 420 steel, and it's supposed to be stronger. I have my doubts about that, especially after seeing some destruction tests where that lamination peeled off. So I have my doubts about being stronger. I'm inclined to think that, man, you have cheaper steel here, you have the cheapest steel on the other side. Maybe that's a matter of cost as well. Let's be real. So anyway, VG10 is a very nice steel for survival knives, as Falk-Niven has more than improved, and yeah, N690 is just as good, or maybe even a little bit better. It has a bit more of those, I think it's cobalts that it has a bit more. It's, you know, improving some of those characteristics, a bit more stain resistant. It is a steel that very limited care, because it's going to be resisting rust very, very nicely. You know, all knives have to be taken care of, but let's admit it, with N690, it's going to be a breeze to keep this, you know, very nice and clean. That's also one of the things that you sometimes see manufacturers do, which is just, you know, not butter all that much and just put a layer of epoxy paint and whatnot. Now, in terms of blade design, the idea was to have a very classic blade, and my wife was telling me this the other day. She told me, you know, all knives look the same. I don't see any difference, and that's, you know, for most people that's the case. Now, when you're a little bit more obsessive compulsive about these things, you start working on all those little details. So for someone that sees this thing and says, well, that looks like just about any other knife that I've seen, true, and that's actually a compliment for me, because everything has been invented in terms of knives. There's really nothing all that new. And whenever you see something that's very different, it's usually crap, because if it's different and hasn't been seen before after thousands of years, it's usually because it doesn't work all that great, But in this case, it seems like a very traditional, very organic, blade shape with a nice continuous line. That's what I want. I'm thinking of the tracker right now. It has like that mixture of, yes, it's half an axe and this part is a blade, and I don't see that kind of gimmicky thing being something all that useful. So my thinking was this. I'm going with a recurve blade. This is 17 centimeters long, right? So it's like a mid-size survival knife. I wouldn't want to go much smaller than this. Some knives a little bit smaller may still be okay, but for me this is like a good in-between point for a survival knife. With the recurve, I have a couple things going that give me some benefits. You see that this is wider, so this is going to be a little bit more head heavy, and that means it's going to be chopping nicely. It's a thick blade. This is 5 millimeters thick, all right? So it's pretty thick with those 5 millimeters, and something sturdy, heavy, which is good for a survival knife. And it's gonna be chopping nicely with that blade geometry. It's gonna be balancing about this point, especially when I get those scales. It's gonna be giving it a little bit more weight here. It's gonna be dropping about there where I'm indexing the knife. So chopping using the, it's not quite a kukri knife, of course, but it's using those same mechanics of heavier head being better for chopping. Chops very nicely. I guess I have to edit that video that I have. It's kind of long and boring, but maybe some of you guys want to see it. For that, it works well. With that curve that it has here, what happens is when you're cutting anything in this portion, when you move back and forth here, for example, you're using all of your, the cutting ability depends on the pressure downward that you're applying. Now, when you're cutting here, you're mostly using the geometry advantage of having a curvature, which is trapping the material and forcing it against the edge when you move back and forth. That is the same mechanics that apply to a serration, right? So this part is going to be cutting very well. This is going to be better suited for chopping, which is what you mostly end up doing with a survival knife of this size. You end up chopping with this part, so it works well there. And for general use, you're going to be using most of your blade either way, but this part being more inward, it's going to be a little bit more protective from whatever use you're exposing it to. So when you have you want to do a little bit more detailed and careful cutting, you have that edge a little bit more protected. Talking about that part, one of the things I decided I didn't want to have in my knife, and it's very popular, is having a choil. This thing. Oh man, choils. Well, this is the thing. Supposedly you're using your knife and the choil is for choking on the blade and doing detailed work. I never bought that, because with a knife like the one I designed, you can do that very much the same thing with the actual handle, which is what you have intended for holding your knife, and you're not risking cutting yourself or anything silly like that. You're getting close to that edge with the actual handle. So why do you want this? Well, first of all, I've always felt I'm being robbed of my edge when I see this going on, because I want that part. I paid for the entire damn knife. Give me that edge too. So that's always been a thing that I never liked. Besides that, this part is very important for a knife because it's the one where you need the less force to cut. This, again, simple mechanics. If you have your strength, the force being applied here, if I'm cutting here, I have to multiply that by this distance. The more distance I have, the more force I'm going to be needing to cut. So that means that this part here is the one that gives me the least force needed to go through material. All right, so when you have this going on, you're being robbed of the more efficient use edge in your knife. Right, this is gonna be great for carving. In fact, when I actually have the handle instead of this cord, you're getting your thumb in there and using it for feather sticking and that sort of thing in this direction like that. That's gonna be nice. Also, this is a survival knife. It may be that someone is, caught in a cord, rope needs to be cut because someone is about to get, lose an arm or drown and something needs to be cut. I don't want to put this knife, against that material and later figure out that I have it trapped in there and it's not cutting while desperately trying to free someone, and I have this thing without an edge, no such thing happening here. The entire length of the knife is going to be cutting. And talking about the length of the knife, I said it was 17 centimeters long, sure, but the edge is 18 centimeters long. How is it possible that the edge is longer than the length of the blade? Well, very simple, because it has a curvature, so it has more of a liner cutting edge. When you measure it, it goes for exactly 18 centimeters because of the curvature and 17 centimeter blade. That's nice too. I also got a nice result with the tip. As I said before, just, you know, it's very strong, and I'm happy the way it ended up, because you have to find a point where it has good penetration but still be strong so as to take a lot of abuse, especially in a survival knife. So for example, in your K-bar, which is a historically proven knife design, but the tip is particularly, you know, fragile. If you start stabbing with a K-bar in wood and start twisting, you're going to be breaking it. Not so much here. I mean, and you could have gone with a more rounded tip, but this is not going to be penetrating as well. You know, this is just penetrating nothing at all. This is almost completely rounded. But here, I feel I got that sweet spot of strong enough, yet enough penetration so as to do whatever task needs to be done. So man, that's it. It's a knife I'm very proud of. I'm very happy with the results. I couldn't be happier with the steel and the heat treatment, given what I've seen so far. And I'll get you, keep you guys posted on future updates. As soon as I have more news, I'll let you know. Have an awesome day, folks. See you in our next video. Take care.